Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Nate Zimdars of Ripon is a Democratic candidate in the 41st Assembly District. Nate, welcome to Wisconsin Eye.
Hey, it's good to be with you today, Steve.
On your social media, you identify four issues, but let me ask you about three. Future farms, healthcare, infrastructure. Which of those or anything do you consider your top campaign issue?
Agriculture is my top campaign issue. As somebody who grew up in agriculture, I was raised on a small hobby farm, showing sheep and poultry for 4-H and FFA projects. And I was also blessed to live just down the road from Zimdars Family Farm, the farm that has been in the Zimdars family for 5 generations, or about 145 years, something I'm very proud of. I still try to stay active and involved where I can, but currently my full-time job is still within agriculture. I work for Saputo Cheese, which is a local cheese processing plant just outside of Waupun. So if you're familiar with the pizza brands, Little Caesars or Rocky Rococo's, there's a good chance that I might have had a hand in your pizza. But all of that to say, I've been very active within agriculture. That was my upbringing. I currently stay involved with Farm Bureau, with the FFA alumni organization. And when I look at the state of our agriculture economy here in Wisconsin, we have been going through some very challenging times. And I know agriculture, especially dairy, is such a key part of our identity as Wisconsinites. So I believe it is important to have more representatives who carry an intimate involvement within the agriculture industry so that they can speak to the issues at large and bring a little bit more insight, because I feel that's something that we are lacking as we continue to see more and more people leave the farms and become farther removed from agriculture. So that continues to be one of my number one priorities. A lot of it is based on my involvement, but also just looking at the 41st Assembly District. It is a very large, very rural district, and there's a lot of agriculture, whether it's farms, whether it's cheese processing plants, or other aspects of the industry. So there is more that I believe we need to continue to do to support our small local family farms and some of those other industries, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and how we've seen that affect supply chains.
Well, you just mentioned the COVID pandemic. If it affects state tax collections, and I'm going to make up a number, if we don't get $1 billion in tax collections than that we had expected and hoped, how would you as a member of the Assembly make up that shortfall?
Great question, Steve, and that's something that I'm very concerned about. Fortunately, some of the numbers that we just saw released a couple of weeks ago make it look as if things are not as dark as what we may have originally anticipated. All of that to say, though, there is still a lot of concern as we move forward. The pandemic is not over, and regardless of where we end up in a few months, there are going to be some significant changes coming. And when I look at this issue, I believe it's important for us to take into consideration both sides. We need to look at where we can cut spending. Speaking personally, whenever I have been in situations in my life where the budget's been a little tight, I have always had to look at where I needed to trim my spending. I couldn't just make revenue come in overnight. That being said, we also have to leave open the possibility of bringing tax increases or raising fees for certain products perhaps. But I think first and foremost, we need to look at where we can trim, and depending on where we come out from that, then we can make decisions on where increases need to be made. And at the same time, we have to include the public on this. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about what the Joint Finance Committee currently does, traveling across the state, speaking with individuals, organizations, trying to seek that input so we know what people feel about the spending priorities here in our state. So if I were to be elected as a state representative, that would be one of my top priorities, would be continuing to travel through Assembly District 41, traveling across the state and speaking with stakeholders, bringing everybody to the table to know how we can continue to move forward in the best manner. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, we do need an elected official who has that experience working with taxpayer dollars, something I'm familiar with being on the Ripon Area School Board, to be in this position, because this is going to be a critical point in our state's history, working with this budget in light of this once in a century pandemic.
The decision Governor Evers must make on September 28th to continue the statewide mask edict or let it lapse, let it die. What do you hope he does?
Well, I hope our governor takes into consideration what the current numbers are regarding the number of patients who are in hospitals, the infection rates, has it been increasing, has it been decreasing, and then make a determination based off that. I feel like our numbers have increased, especially in the last couple of weeks when we have had universities go back into session. That's something that continues to worry me, and that's all with the mask mandate having been in effect for over a month. So that's something I continue to be concerned about. Yet I feel like based on all of the research, the opinions from our scientific experts, they're all saying that we need to have face masks if we want to continue to stem this virus that we all know transmits very, very easily through our respiratory systems. So I certainly hope our governor consults with all of the experts. And I personally believe that we should continue to wear masks. I know one of the ways that I look at it is through a faith perspective. As somebody who's very involved in the Lutheran Church, I was raised with the belief to love your neighbor. And when I look at our current situation and how this disease, how this virus has been affecting people, if experts are telling me that wearing a face mask is just one small thing that I can do, one small inconvenience to maybe prevent this virus from being transmitted, then I'm going to do what I can to, in essence, love my neighbor.
Okay. The frontline role that hospitals have played in Wisconsin and across the nation in treating COVID-19 patients, does this mean that in the next budget cycle, hospitals should be an even greater priority than they may be in the current budget?
I do, again, want to be mindful of what our budget situation is when it comes time to write that budget. I want to see what we have for revenue available, what tax dollars we've been able to bring in. I do believe that we should try to make increasing funding for our hospitals a priority, especially our rural hospitals. Assembly District 41 is a very rural district. We only have a handful of hospitals, and depending where you are in the Assembly District, there are folks that have to drive a half hour, maybe an hour, and if they want to stay with their provider, perhaps even farther. So I certainly believe that we need to do more as a state to support our rural hospitals and our rural clinics. And I know the virus hasn't had as much of an impact in our rural areas as compared to our urban areas, yet there still has to be more support that we offer to people who choose to live in our rural places and spaces. So that's certainly an area that I would want to focus on when we discuss the budget and increasing funding for hospitals and clinics.
Bills have recently been introduced in both the Assembly and Senate that says that any business, any organization that tries to comply with COVID protocols to protect its patients, customers, or employees could not be sued because of COVID. Is that a bill you could vote for?
Absolutely. I believe if businesses are doing everything in their power to try to prevent this virus from spreading, if they're taking things into consideration like wearing a mask, social distancing, and I know the mask thing is a mandate right now, so that's something we all have to remember. With all of that being said, if these businesses are trying to comply and yet there is still something that happens, there is still somebody who becomes infected and it was traced back to this business, if the owner's doing everything in their power to try to stop it, I don't see how they can be held responsible. Sometimes things just happen.
The debate in the Capitol over who should draw the next congressional and legislative district lines, do you support the governor's plan for a Fair Maps Commission that would draw them, then forwarded to the legislature to be enacted?
I do believe we need to move in that direction. I know right now our state constitution says that the state legislature, the majority party at the time of writing the maps, is the party, the organization or group that is in charge of that process. Right. Yet that being said, we have seen gerrymandering that has drastically impacted our political climate here in the state of Wisconsin, especially in the last 10 years. And I don't believe that there is an incentive, doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, I don't believe that there is an incentive in place for the party in power to draw maps that would be beneficial to the party with opposing beliefs. And one way that we can rectify that situation is by the creation of a nonpartisan commission. However that's created, perhaps this is where we can involve the legislature. We can have Republicans choose 3 individuals. We can have Democrats choose 3 individuals to be on this commission, similar to the Wisconsin Elections Commission and how that's organized. What ultimately has to be done, though, is a change to the state constitution. And that's something that we have seen in the past couple of years. There was talk just a couple of years ago about changing our state constitution to eliminate the office of the treasurer, something that we as a state ultimately had a vote on. I don't see why we can't do something similar for nonpartisan redistricting. I tend to be of the belief that just because it is doesn't mean it should be. When I know a lot of folks like to say, well, that's the way it is, so let's continue down that path. Sometimes we need to pause and we need to reevaluate so that we can continue to live into our state motto of moving forward.
The debate over policing reforms has been very emotional and played out nationally and even in Kenosha. The governor has 9 bills. Republican Senator Weingard has 7 or 8. The legislature's Black Caucus has other ideas, and the speaker is going to form a task force. Are there any specific policing reforms you think that should be enacted?
So I am in support of the 9-bill package that our governor is trying to push forward. And I find it reassuring that the Wisconsin Professional Police Association is in favor of this bill package. So to me, it seems like this is kind of a no-brainer. This is a common sense solution for challenging issues we are facing in our state. And I by no means believe that this package of bills is going to end some of the challenges that we've been seeing with law enforcement and how our communities of color have been feeling, especially in the last couple of months. So there is more work that we must continue to do as a state to really address racial injustice, systematic racism. Yet I believe that this package of bills is a step forward in the right direction. Frankly, I feel as if we have had a lot of conversation about this in the past. So I question creating a task force with everything going on. Yet if there is something good that can come from this task force, by all means, let's continue to move forward on that front. And I believe Senator Van Weingard, from his perspective as a law enforcement officer, as a sheriff, he has some valuable insight that he could provide to this process. And I liked his idea about creating a database. So we'll continue to have conversations about that in the coming months. It's my hope at the end of the day that ultimately our governor can work hand in hand with our legislature, with both parties, to really take some monumental steps to address what has really become a serious issue. And it's been a serious issue for a long, long time. And now the light has been shed on it.
As more states around Wisconsin have legalized medical and recreational marijuana, that's changed the dynamics of the debate in our capital. What's your position on that?
I believe we need to move towards full legalization for medical and recreational marijuana. I believe this is an instance of big government at play, insisting on whether people telling people what they can and can't do in their own personal time. So I think our government needs to take a step back in concerns to that. We look at some of the other states in our nation who have already legalized both medical and recreational, and we have seen the tax revenues that have come in from that, and it's tremendous. So when we look at having to write the state budget this next year, concerns about revenue loss, this is just one way that we can continue to increase revenue to our state. To me, it's a no-brainer. Let's go ahead and move forward in that direction. And another thing I believe people should be aware of when we have this conversation about legalization and the benefits that we as a state can take from taxes, we need to look at how many other states have already done this, how many more states are continuing to move forward in this direction, because I know there's a lot of states this November who are going to be voting for either medical, recreational, or both. And the more states that continue to legalize, I believe we are going to see the revenue decrease. If Wisconsin is one of the last states to legalize marijuana, we are probably going to see less of a boon, less of a revenue from legalizing marijuana than if we were to go ahead and move in that direction right now.
One of your priorities is, as you list on your campaign website, is infrastructure. Governor Evers last year recommended raising the gas tax to find a stable way to pay for highways and bridges. Are you ready to raise the gas tax?
I am ready to raise the gas tax. As an active Farm Bureau member, somebody who sits on the Fond du Lac County Farm Bureau Board of Directors, this is a conversation that we as an organization have been having for a long, long time now. I actually just had a policy development meeting with our County Farm Bureau last night, and this topic briefly came up. We are of the belief that we do need to do whatever we can to continue to provide funding for our roads, especially our rural roads, because far too often our rural roads are forgotten about and are in desperate need of repair. And our counties, our townships, our cities, they only have so many resources available at their disposal. Mm-hmm. And I believe the gas tax is just one way that we can do it. I don't feel confident in moving forward to a 30% hike like Governor Evers had suggested, but I do believe that we can increase the gas tax at this point in time. And to me, it just makes sense. I consider all of the tourists that we have come into Assembly District 41, the number of individuals from outside of the state, especially in the Chicago area, who have summer homes right around Green Lake, perhaps Marquette County, Adams County. And these are folks who are using our roads. They are adding to the wear and tear on our county highways and our local roads. And if they're going to be driving on our roads, I believe they should also be supporting those roads through tax dollars. That's why I was disappointed when we last had this conversation. The vehicle registration fees was the only thing that was really pushed forward because that only impacts Wisconsinites. And there's a whole lot of other people from outside of the state who are using these roads. So the gas tax, absolutely. Vehicle registration fees, we continue with those. And there's a couple other revenue sources I believe that we can look at too.
Okay. Because Wisconsin is a high property tax state, schools and local governments have been living with caps and revenue limits for more than 20 years, frankly, to control property taxes on homes. Should those caps and limits on property tax levies be continued, Nate?
I believe we need to reevaluate our funding formula, and this comes from my perspective as a school board member right here in the Ripon Area School District. We have had to go to referendum several times in the past couple of decades. We actually are having a referendum, a $500,000 operating referendum that is going to be on the ballot this November. So this is something very personal to me. It's something that's impacting my district and our ability to provide a quality education to our students. And getting away from my own district, a neighboring district, the Green Lake School District, they have had many issues on this front in being able to receive aid to support education in their district. Green Lake has high property value. There are a lot of beautiful multi-million-dollar summer homes that are on Green Lake. And a lot of these folks have homes on Green Lake. They don't live here full time. So the property value is high, and we're seeing a school district where the graduation class is often around 15, maybe 20 students. They don't receive any state aid. So they are continually having to go to referendum. They're continually having to ask citizens to pony up just to support an education that everybody should have access to. So we ultimately have to look at how we can reconfigure our funding formula. And that's something that continues to concern me, especially as we are in a very rural area. So a lot of these school districts, they have pretty large operating budgets. You look at a school district like Marquezan, Berlin, or even Adams Friendship, you're busing in students from over a half hour away. All of that adds up, and there is more that we as a state can do to provide better funding for our school districts that takes off that burden and avoids referendums being repeated year after year.
A follow-up question to that, do local governments like cities, towns, and villages, do they need to reduce reliance on property taxes by considering alternative sources of revenue? Democratic Representative Goyke from Milwaukee has a bill. If a referendum passes, the city could levy a half-cent sales tax. Do we need to give local governments options like that, Nate?
Absolutely. Right here in Fond du Lac County, in the past, they have done just that. I know Mercury Marine a few years ago was discussing picking up and leaving and relocating to Oklahoma. And Mercury Marine is a big boon to our county's economy. And in an incentive package that was offered forward, the money that came into that package was from a 0.5% sales tax. And I think that ultimately it worked. Mercury Marine did decide to stay in the Fond du Lac area, and that was something that benefited employees who live in Ripon, who live in Green Lake, and other spots within Assembly District 41. Mm-hmm. And that's something all counties need to be able to have the ability to do if it means having the proper funding to support basic infrastructure needs or other needs that counties are looking for.
When a school district, like the one you serve on, or local government, plans a major public works project, should they have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses?
I believe they should. Ever since I stepped onto the Ripon Area School Board, that's been a topic of conversation that we as a district have had. We have seen in the last couple of years since I have been elected to the board an increase in our board members asking our administrators, asking our business department to look at local contractors that we can work at, specifically businesses that are within the Ripon area, because we would like to benefit local companies. We would like to have them doing the work right here in our community instead of looking at much larger companies that are farther away from our district or even outside of the state. So I believe ultimately at the end of the day, we do need to prioritize local investment, and that comes from supporting area businesses.
Final question then. It's an open seat with Representative Ballweg trying to move up to the state Senate. Differences between you and your opponent on November 3?
I'll try to keep it short. Ultimately, at the end of the day, when we look at these serious times that we are living in right now, I believe that we need somebody who has experience. I am the only candidate who has elected office experience. I was elected by my community to represent our area on the school board. I have had intimate experience working with taxpayer dollars in the millions of dollars, and our budget for the Ripon Area School District is much larger than the city of Ripon and many of the other townships and cities or even school districts within the Assembly District. And I believe that that is something I can bring to the state legislature, especially going forward into what is going to be a budget writing year. Having that experience, that proven track record, is something that is incredibly important, now more than ever. Also, given my background within agriculture, as somebody who grew up in agriculture, as somebody who still continues to work in agriculture, that is an important perspective that we need to continue to have in our state capital. We have less and less folks who are connected to agriculture serving, and we look at the agriculture economy, $88 billion to Wisconsin's economy. And it's important to have folks who understand all of the intricacies within agriculture who are seated at the table. So that's what I can bring as an individual, that background in agriculture, that elected experience, that involvement within my community, and being able to work with a large budget. Also, it's important for me to mention too that even though I am running as a Democrat, I am not running as somebody who is hyper-partisan. I grew up in a Republican background. I am not running because I want to hurt the other side. I recognize that this is a more conservative assembly district, and that if I were to be elected to serve in the state representative, ultimately I need to represent everybody, regardless of their political party, be it Republican, Democrat, Independent, or if they're individuals who don't really care much for politics. I need to represent everybody, and I have that desire to serve my community regardless of where people fall in the political perspective, because that's what I believe a representative does. They have to represent their constituency, not just their personal beliefs, but the people they're serving. And that is what I can offer as your next state representative.
Nate Zimdars of Ripon is a Democratic candidate in the 41st Assembly District. The election is November 3. Nate, thank you for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate your time.
Take care and stay safe. Thank you.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.